the moment. And so, those of you who have been so faithful with every single lecture, here is my opening screen again with your contact information on contacting the Evolutionary Astrology Network. And I want to say something right off the bat here. Tomorrow's lineup for Friday, one of our speakers had to decline for health reasons. And so Nura Rose Sala will not be with us tomorrow. That is when we have scheduled Robert Gover's lecture on time and money, past, present, and future. Part 1 will take place Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock. And then, of course, part 2 will be Saturday morning at 10 a.m. So just a little switch in the lineup for you to make a note of. And of course, at the Evolutionary Astrology Network, we have a lot of offerings for people who are brand new to astrology or wanting certification.
Destroyed a bunch of files.
Oops, what do you mean? Can you hit undo, Bertaluz? I can hear you, honey.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. So anyway, we have anything from our free weekly podcast to our Astro Library to our multimedia course and certification. And here is the EAN Astro Library, which is less than a year old. It came out with our new website in February of this year. We have reorganized the dozens and hundreds of hours that we have with our different EA professional evolutionary astrologers and all the different subject matters of which you can subscribe to the library for 1 month, for 6 months, for a year, or a recurring subscription month by month. And then, of course, here is our multimedia course with the 3 different segments that we have available. Each segment comes with access to our students area of the website where we have archived over 250 hours of audio files. And starting the beginning of 2014, we will start doing monthly classes on segment 2, and Kim Marie will start doing these on a webinar basis, just like you're seeing on your screen right now. So again, there's our contact information, and at this point, I would like Leroy to turn the screen over to Bertaluz again, and as that comes up, I will give us an introduction to him. While I'm speaking, I would like everybody to know that Bertaluz is also one of our presenters from the Colorado area along the Front Range, and so we would just like to again extend our thoughts and prayers to everybody out there going through all of the momentous shifting they have happening with all of the water along the Front Range. Now, having said that, it's a little bit of a different situation for Bertaluz. He just went through a hand fasting ceremony on Tuesday. Am I correct with that, Bertaluz?
Yeah, we had our families here and all of our friends, and did a beautiful hand fasting wedding ceremony. And it was the one day that the weather opened up. It was really beautiful, and we were really blessed.
All right. Well, I'd like to say on behalf of Leroy and I and our listeners present and anybody listening in the future, congratulations. We appreciate hearing a happy story with all of these deep subjects we've been covering with all of the planetary aspects in the sky. And so, Bertaluz, I would like to turn it over to you now. I'd like you to give us a brief synopsis of yourself before you go into your presentation. And thank you for lecturing, and welcome.
Sure. So you guys can see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see your screen just fine. We can see you.
Right. Cool. All right, well, yeah, I'll just introduce you to myself first and also give you a little outline for the talk today. And first want to thank both Kim and Leroy for this really awesome opportunity to share with the whole EA community. And this is one of my great passions, relocation astrology, astrolocality. So let me give you a little bit of background of me, and then we'll give you the outline for today and dive in. So I've been studying astrology probably for many lifetimes, but in this lifetime for about 8 years. And it really grew out of my fascination with the Mayan calendar, with the end date of December 21st, 2012. When I first heard about that, I just dove in, and through a number of synchronicities, really powerful circumstances, I came to meet a Mayan and Western astrologer who turned me on to multiple systems and really reflected my soul back to me very profoundly. I started to work in shamanic astrology with Daniel Jamario, and then getting into evolutionary astrology. Lots of different teachers along the way, conferences and whatnot. But what really drew me really deep was this relocation work, because I had traveled many countries in my 20s. I've traveled to about 25 different countries, and at that time it was somewhere around 15 to 20, and I saw how these different places affected me so profoundly. And I also knew, as I'm going to describe here, that I was of a generation, Neptune and Sagittarius generation, who feels themselves as nomads and vagabonds and spiritual seekers, and that I was going to continue to travel. And so I really wanted to get into mastering this element of astrology around relocation and finding our power places around the planet. So early on in studying astrology, I jumped into studying with Moses Sirigar, who was my major teacher in relocation work. And the great thing with studying with Moses, who put on the Blast conference a couple times down in Sedona, is that he's both a Vedic and Western astrologer, and knows a lot of Hellenistic Greek techniques. So what was beautiful in studying with him was this panorama of techniques, possibilities, languages to integrate into relocation work. It wasn't just about astrocartography lines. It was really looking at a lot of different things that I'm going to bring up here today to really give clients the most holistic interpretation of their planetary energies around the Earth, and how to work with those influences. So in the last few years, I've written a few books on astrology: Codex of the Soul, Astrology, Archetypes, and Your Sacred Blueprint. And then my latest book is about the wounded healer. It's called Aquarius Dance, the Shamanic Artist and the Rise of the Wounded Healer. And I do a lot of readings and teach and travel and teach all over the country and in different places. Love doing embodied practices with astrology, astro yoga, and these kinds of things, but also lectures, and do a lot of teleclasses and webinars as well. So currently doing a series on the archetypes as we speak. I'm also a human design analyst and do some coaching with both human design and astrology, and of course relocation work. So there's a lot there, but I want to dive into the talk here. I'm going to move on to the slide and give you the outline for today's talk. So before I jump in, I just want to make sure, because there was two different things on the scheduling. Kim, if you could get back to me. I want to make sure that I have until 5:30 this local time, 2 hours, so that I don't go too far if I don't have until that time.
Let's call 5:15 kind of the max.
Okay.
Bird or lose, okay? We'll go for 5:15.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
That sounds great. Thank you. Okay, so let's jump in. So what I wanted to show today was a little bit about why astrolocality is so important as a language today, especially as we're merging into the Aquarian age. So I'm going to paint a sort of a broad palette here at the beginning, and then bring it down to this decade and why this Uranus-Pluto square, Uranus in Aries and Neptune in Pisces, are actually really also very powerful reflections for why astrolocality is really important to study and apply with our clients and in our lives today. And then I'll go into specific techniques: astrocartography, local space, terrain, geodetics, different tools that we can apply in working with relocation astrology. The last thing I'll say is I will be using a lot of my own life as examples, but a lot of other people, famous people, clients, friends of mine. But I've just, because I've traveled so much, I've been able to look back and forward, looking back before I knew astrology, into what lines were happening in places, and how I worked with it. And I got a lot of insight and compassion for myself and for other people as I started to see, oh, these are the influences, and this is how I was working with them. But in looking forward, that's where the real empowerment has come, both for myself and the people I work with, to be able to strategize the places that we want to live, we want to travel, we want to work, and really we want to evolve our soul. And so it's such a great tool. And so I'm just going to dive in here to some of the early points here. First of all, most of us aren't living today where we were born. Some of us are, but a lot of us are traveling and relocating. So first of all, just even as people in client, working with clients as astrologers, looking at a relocated chart is actually a really significant thing to do that we should be pulling up whenever we look at a client's chart. Because if we're not looking, if they're not living where they were when they were born, they have this filter of the relocated chart influencing all of their life experiences there. So I often, will pull up relocated charts if I'm just doing a client reading, because that's a lived experience that someone has experienced in that place. So this is really important, that a lot of us aren't living in these places where we grew up, and we are needing to actually look at a natal chart and a relocated chart. Okay, so one of the obvious things is, if we move, for instance, to the opposite coast, maybe we grew up on the West Coast like myself, and we moved to the East Coast or the other way around, we're going to see that we're going to have a very different looking chart in terms of what houses are, for instance, on the angle, which we're going to talk about are very, very significant signs on the cusp. We're going to see that we're going to have different rising signs, different midheaven, and we're going to also take our planets and move them throughout the chart. So if we have a stellium, for instance, if we have 3 or more planets in a house or a sign, we can move, for instance, from a 5th house stellium where, we may have a lot of recreation and play and, children focus, into an 8th house stellium. And now it's going to be all about, death and rebirth cycles and psychological processes. We're going to live our life in a very, very different way. This is one of the reasons why astrolocality is really important, because even the slight changes of time zones, for instance, in the U.S. and North America, will make a huge amount of difference. The other thing to talk about is that, relocated places or charts will show us our power places, which really means the places of potentiating our birth chart. Taking what may not be so strong in, or maybe pregnant with possibility, but then when we move it to an angle, for instance, a planet like the sun, moving it to the top of the chart could mean, instant fame for someone or recognition or success, whereas it could have been sort of dormant in another location or just kind of hidden away. So this is something really important, that we're able to really potentiate ourselves or our clients' lives in the ways that they're seeking. And really important that there's no perfect place. A lot of times clients will come and ask, where's the best place for me? But really, as one of the early points I'm going to make here, we're going to always need to look at what are our goals, and then we're going to look at what places really support that goal through these different techniques. Okay, so, real quick, I just want to move through this intro part pretty fast, and I think it'll all make sense for everyone. But it is important to set some context. I'm part of a generation that's a Neptune and Sagittarius generation, born 1970 and 1984. But there's a lot of Sagittarian generations that are rising to power now. And why this is important is because Sagittarius is, of course, the sign that we associate most with travel, especially foreign travel, with that vagabond or nomad spirit that takes us to other places. Travel is really the default setting for a lot of these generations. I know that growing up myself, I felt And I know a lot of people my age feel like, living in one place our whole life would be very limiting to the grand scope. But think about the centaur, and we all know that spirit of the wild horse wanting to go out there and roam and explore and really tap into more of our soul's potential that can be realized more acutely in these different locations where we live or travel. So the pilgrim spirit, the gypsy spirit, is really part of the generations that are starting to rise in power. Neptune in Sagittarius generation, 70 to 84, Uranus in Sag, 1981 to 1988, and Pluto in Sag generation, 1995 to 2008. And of course, all these generations have a different purpose. Neptune is bringing the vision and the spirit of the global traveler. Uranus is bringing the potential of innovation and insight and epiphany, to the spirit of travel and journeying. And Pluto, of course, is what is the transformational potential of moving to these different locations? How do we actually take the traveler and the teacher archetype and really evolve them? That's a generation that grew up with 9/11 as being in their childhood imagery. So what does it mean to be a global citizen? These are big questions for these generations as they rise to power, and they're really big questions for those of us, all of us, emerging into the Aquarian age. So one of the important things is, the Aquarian age, which I talk about a lot in my book, Aquarius Dawn. There's so much to say about this, but one of the major ethics behind it is the ethic of freedom, that we no longer have to be limited to much anymore. We really have the potential to choose our own adventure, as I like to say. And that means that we can break through the confines of our culture, of religion that we were brought up in, of even the educational systems, and really tap into more of our freedom and potential, full potential, by breaking through the limiting definitions. This is one of the major important points about the Aquarian age, that we are truly a global village, and we have the potential of actually finding ourselves anywhere around the planet. Now, technology is allowing ourselves a lot of the liberating potential of Aquarius, but no longer can we be stuck in the stories of our parents or our upbringing. We have to really choose the path and the life that is going to be most fulfilling for us. And we have these technologies, for instance, the technologies of the software of relocation astrology using solar maps, or many of the other softwares that we have to actually instantly reflect to us our soul's peak places or power places. And we have this incredible tool that we really want to take advantage of at this time, because we are actually, in some sense, more blessed than a lot of generations that have come before, because we can instantly see where we can really grow to our fullest potential. This is really unprecedented. The other thing about this point, living in the Aquarian age, is, a lot of us have been to, myself included, and study a lot about power places or the ley lines of the earth, where we have places like the pyramids of the Mayans, the Egyptians, or we have a Machu Picchu or Angkor Wat. And these places are very powerful, the energy they hold. But some of us may have traveled to these places, again, myself included, and also noticed that some of these places are losing some of their power, because so many people are going to them, and not necessarily in the most conscious way. And an interesting thing that we can think about is that we all have our personal vortices or vortex spaces, personal ley lines. And this is where our relocation maps show us where our own power places, pyramid locations really are, where we can access the heights of our potential here. So sort of personal vortex spots. This is one of the ways to think about our relocation lines. The other thing that is really important at this time, in this decade, are some of the collective transits that have been talked about in this conference and every conference right now. This has to do with the Uranus-Pluto square, Uranus in Aries, Neptune in Pisces. So a couple key points here that make this decade one of the peak times for relocation, migration, travel, is that we're living in these cycles where we can look back at previous cycles. This is that archetypal historical lens that we love to use in studying astrology to really gauge into what's really happening to us right now. And one of the things we know is that every plane we get on seems to be packed with people. You know, we're all traveling constantly. This is, again, probably the most unprecedented time in history for collective group travel. Well, if we look back to previous times. For instance, Uranus is in Aries now. Well, Aries, of course, is a sign of, yeah, it's a traveler, but it's an adventurer. It keeps us moving. Aries is a very restless sign. When we put Uranus there, we know that we are part of our liberation, part of our sense of personal freedom, and really living an authentic, original self. Uranus is about finding ourselves, and that finding ourselves, Aries, it is often through trusting that instinct, that gut feeling, and saying, I need to go here, I need to be there now. And when we look back at the last cycle when Uranus was in Aries in the late 20s and 30s, this is a really dislocating time on the planet. You know, we had the Great Depression, and we also had, during that, people looking for work, hunting for jobs. And then you had these great movements in Europe as, you know, people were looking towards different kinds of governance. You know, is it going to be socialism? Is it going to be communism? Is it going to be the rise of Hitler? What is going to be this sort of governance that's going to really move my soul and what I align with? So this created a lot of dislocation on the planet, which we also saw back in the last Uranus and Aries cycle, excuse me, which was in the 1850s time period, late 40s, early 50s. Now, that's a really interesting time to study for where we're at now, because it was also the time, last time, when Neptune was in Pisces. So we have two similar cycles during around the same decade of time, late 40s and early 50s of the 1800s. And something that we saw during that time was there were massive revolutions taking place all over the planet. Sound familiar? And this was a time where these revolutions in the major cities of Europe actually created a lot of movement around the planet. Then there was like the potato famine in Ireland, which also created people moving or leaving a lot of those European countries, coming to America. So this immigration energy was actually really starting up. It's one of the big themes in our political movements of today. You know, it was a big theme in the 2012 elections. These are things that repeat, as we know, if we study archetypes through history. But what I want to just emphasize in it is that this is a very relocating, migratory type of time period that we live in. Neptune in Pisces was actually, if you go all the way back, it was the time where we call it the great ages of exploration. So if we look at the great seafaring voyages, where there was those journeys, you know, around the planet to try to map the Earth, Magellan, Ponce de Leon, Pizarro, all these names in the sort of globalist movement to map the Earth, actually a lot of that was taking place under the Neptune and Pisces cycle when we go back many centuries. So we see that there is this constant movement energy with these cycles that we're in now. And the last point on this, Uranus square Pluto, the big energy right now. Richard Tarnas in Cosmos and Psyche really talks a lot about how the demographic shifts that took place in every Uranus-Pluto cycle, people moving around the planet, worldwide migration. So that's why this is a key time to really bring these relocation techniques into our lives and into our practice with our clients and for our beloveds and in everything that we do. So let's start to get into some of these relocation techniques. So we have a few different, I'm going to go through these one by one, but we have a few different techniques that we can use. Now, most astrologers are familiar, and even people searching for help with movement or relocating, they've heard of ACG or astrocartography. And this is where we look at different planets on the angles of the chart. So when you move, you're going to see that there's going to be different planets that will be rising, setting, culminating, or at the top of the sky or the top of the chart, or at the bottom of the chart at the IC, at the roots. So these planets become the dominant figures, the dominant intelligences or characters that really rule our lives in those locations when they're rising or setting, culminating, or at the roots of our chart. So I'm going to get into all the specifics about astrocartography, but that's what we're dealing with astrocartography. Then we're going to talk about local space techniques. We're going to look into params, which is actually an ancient Egyptian technique. Talk about cyclocartography, which is something that I feel is really underappreciated in astrology, but it's really important. It's really about transits or forecasting over specific locations. Then we have the geodetic map, which is a very interesting technique we'll talk about towards the end of the lecture. You can even use fixed stars if you work with the fixed stars in relocation as one of your relocation techniques, which is actually bringing sort of back to the Egyptian way of working astrologically. And then you can even bring in clients or your own synastry with cities, with states, with countries even. But this is looking at a city chart, comparing it with a birth chart of a client or yourself. So I don't do all of these techniques myself when I work with clients. It really depends on what a client is looking for, how much time we have together. But there are some nuts and bolts that I'll always work with. So let's get into that right now. This workshop or this conference is really about, how to really step into our empowerment and success in life. And, the Scorpio North Node, everything that's been talked about so far and continues to be talked about in this conference. We're looking at this question, though, what is enterprise, what is success, what is empowerment? And this gets into the fundamental, when we're working with clients, the question is, what is the goal? If we want to be successful in a location, does that success for us mean that we have a lot of money? Does it mean that we have a great network of people that we're working with? Does it mean that we have consistent work, that we're really loving what we do every day? Does it mean that we're in a community that we really feel connected to and that we're serving? We all have different goals. I mean, fundamentally, a lot of people want to live in a very secure and stable place. But as we get into astrocartography and some of these techniques, just because we're in a secure place doesn't mean we're going to be successful there. So we're always weighing out a lot of different factors when we're doing this work. Knowing our basics in astrology is really important, that there are general significations like money planets, like Venus and Jupiter, or the rulers of the second house and the 11th house, these fortunate houses for money. We have to look at them and to say, well, what are the conditions of these planets in the relocated charts? Now, one of the other things that we look at, of course, is naturally benefic or malefic planets. A lot of us, this is really important to think about. In traditional astrology, Hellenistic astrology, medieval astrology, in Vedic astrology, we do use the terminology of benefic and malefic, and it may be helpful to apply some of that language when looking at relocation charts. Why? Because in general, a lot of us don't like to live in places where Saturn is the most dominant energy, because there's a lot of pressure and responsibility there that if we want to live and do the other things we love to do in our lives, we may not want that heaviness. And that's part of the malefic quality we associate with Saturn. It doesn't mean that we don't want Saturn's high side, of success, of recognition, but we have to also think that there are these general benefic and malefic energies to the planet that are important to bring in, of course, when we are interpreting angular planets or the local space lines, or all of these techniques we're going to talk about. So lastly, every planet and every house can have something to say about success. So I don't want to go through all of these, and I know it's a lot of words for a talk like this, but I just want to say that as any of us practicing astrologers know, that every house can tell us about quite a few things. And if we're looking for career and our empowerment and success, every area of the chart can reflect something to us. Even something like the 5th house can show us about our investments and the potential for fortune. You know, traditionally we talk about gambling with the 5th house. So creative potential, you know, which is very important if we're running our own business, for instance. You know, the 3rd house, marketing and networking and communication. So if we're looking at a relocated chart, actually, if we can look at everything through the lens of success, career, finance, the potential empowerment of a location. 11th house, relationships to groups, the causes that we stand for, and it's traditionally a house of financial success. So we have to look at the traditional house signification when we're doing this kind of work. Now, one of the things that is really important to look at is, you know, I say natal versus relocated chart, but that we always want to pull up both charts if a client doesn't live where they were born. But also, again, we're choosing the goal, or choosing to find a place, an auspicious place for the goal. One of the things that we're going to look at really strongly as we start to look at some charts, I'll pull up for you, is the angles of the relocated chart. So when we're looking at, for instance, somebody's coming to us and saying, I want to be really, I want to be successful in my career. I want to find work that is really, it really juices me up, really vitalizes me. Well, we're going to look at, when we relocate a chart, the sign that's on the midheaven. And this is going to reflect a lot about potential career paths for someone in that location. Obviously, then the planets that move to the angle of career, the midheaven, or the planets that are in the 10th house will show us a lot about the kind of career path in that location. This could be very, very different than what may be in the natal chart for someone. And this is really important, especially if someone has moved halfway across the world. You know, sometimes you'll see the very opposite midheaven or ascendant for that person. So this will be something to really pay attention to. What sign is ruling the house that we're looking to learn a lot about? It could be about finance, so we're looking at the sign on the cusp of the 2nd house, right? But if we're blending our resources or we're partnering up with other people, what sign is on the cusp of the 8th house, or what planets are in the 8th house? So we're looking at a lot of different factors here. Okay, rulers of the houses. This is something really important, and I'm going to pull up the chart here for Jim Carrey. This is important because there he is, Jim Carrey, one of everyone's favorite comedians. This is his birth chart, and then we should have. Oh, let me go back and just pull up that relocated chart for him. There it is, Los Angeles. This is, you know, Hollywood star. So this is really significant because in Jim Carrey's relocated chart in Hollywood, you notice that the planet, the moon, is on the cusp of the 9th house. Well, we're looking at a few different things here that's very important. My teacher, Moses, really taught me a lot about this. It's really important to look at planets on the cusp of houses. Now, this gets into that question around house cusps. What kind of house system are we using? So this is an old question in astrology. But I work, as a lot of evolutionary astrologers do, with porphyry house system. Sometimes I use the whole sign house system. But if I'm doing relocation work, I want to know the angles. I want to know the cusps. So you can use equal house system. You can use porphyry, and they usually really reflect back to us a lot of truth. And I've seen this in my own life and in my clients' life, and Moses really said that he saw this again and again, that planets on the cusp are really important, and those cusps and those planets become very significant for the lived experience of that location. So, for instance, here in Jim Carrey's chart, we're working with two things. The moon is on the cusp of the 9th house. Now, he's out there, he's not necessarily teaching, but he's definitely broadcasting himself. You know, first in Living Color on TV, he was a comedian. And look at what happened. The moon is in Gemini. The moon becomes something that stands out here in LA, in Hollywood. And here it is in the sign of the comedian, the storyteller, you know, the actor, Gemini. And so he's getting a lot of exposure there, also because the moon actually rules his midheaven in this location. Now, this is really important, because if someone's saying, I want to know about my career in this particular location, well, we're looking at the angle of career. And if we just looked at that, we wouldn't get the full story, because we look here for Jim, Cancer midheaven. You look, well, he's a comedian. Most of his roles are comedic. He's done some serious actor roles, but you don't see him as a father figure. So you have to look at the ruler, and the ruler is the moon. The moon rules the midheaven, and there's that moon in Gemini. And then you look at, well, what's his potential for success here? Let's look at the angle, and then let's look at the ruler of the angle and the aspects to the ruler. And the aspects are that beautiful trine to Mercury in Aquarius, conjunct Jupiter in Aquarius, and there's this infinite potential here for success through community. Also, the North Node up here in Leo, in this very auspicious 11th house. But if we're just looking at this trine, wow, Moon to Jupiter, Moon to Mercury, there's comedy. There's a lot of potential here for growth with language, for the people that he knows. But we're also saying that, you know, this moon is in Gemini, and Mercury is, of course, the ruler of Gemini, and there's that aspect between those two planets. So there's just so much potential here in this location for him. You know, so there's a lot going on here for Jim Carrey. I just want to stress the ruler of the midheaven, the aspects to the ruler of the midheaven in a location where someone is really looking for that career success. So we could talk about Jim's chart all day, but we're going to move on. So let's get back to the slide here. Get up the keynote, and there we go, pulling it back up. Okay, I'm not going to enlarge it fully, because I just want to make this point and come back to another chart. So strongly aspected planets. Now, if you pull up Relocation Astrology or Astrocartography online, you may actually come across this thing about least aspected planets. It's actually quite a bit out there about least aspected planets being very significant for some reason. I personally haven't done a lot of research, but there is an astrologer who says that those are very important planets because they're seeking integration. I haven't seen that so much, and on a logical level, it makes a lot more sense that the most strongly aspected planets are going to be planets that are going to be lines, you know, if they're rising or setting or at the top of our chart, where we're going to be really drawn there. Maybe there also are local space lines, and we'll talk about those soon. But we're going to be drawn to those places where we have a lot of dynamic energy in our life, in our soul's journey here. So these are planets we tend to see that are more integrated, they're more present in our life, they're dynamic players in our life. And one of the examples of this, and she's a great example for a lot, is Oprah Winfrey. So she has, I'm going to pull up her chart. So Oprah Winfrey, go to her chart. There's mine. She's up here. There she is. Okay, so this is Oprah's chart, her birth chart, and she was born in Mississippi. If we relocate her to Chicago, not much difference, but what you see is is that we have her moon getting stronger by a couple degrees because the moon is at the bottom of the chart here, and then it moves 2 degrees closer, so it's increasing in strength. And this is one of the most important things about relocation astrology. The closer that we get to, that a planet gets to an angle, the more strong it becomes, and the more we get the configuration as it is in our chart. So it becomes potentiated. If we have a big configuration, planetary configuration, as we do in Oprah's chart, of a grand trine, of a T-square, and in this case, she has a kite. She has a lot of trines, a grand trine going on here that creates this kite. So we see that Jupiter gets closer to the midheaven. Jupiter is at 16 Gemini, the midheaven at 10. Jupiter's beautiful trine down to the sun, down to Venus in Aquarius, in that fortunate 5th house. And then it moves over to this other trine going on here, actually with Ceres in Libra. Ceres, the asteroid of nurturance, abundance, fertility. And we can see that money actually becomes something really strong in the symbol of Ceres. She can bring money into our life, especially if she's in a trine to Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun. Jupiter, a signification of money traditionally. Venus is traditional significator of money. And then a modern significator, Ceres, in a trine. And they're actually in these sextiles, Ceres, exact sextiles to the moon in Sagittarius, Venus and the Sun sextiling down to Sagittarius. This creates this wonderful kite. It actually links up right to the midheaven. And this is why we have this billionaire woman there in Chicago, rose to power in Chicago, lived there, and then also did her show, the Oprah Winfrey show there in Chicago. There's so much to talk about in just studying Oprah's chart there. One of the things, too, she lives in that location, moon on the IC. Wow, those are locations, as I'm going to talk about later, that we just love to call home. The moon is in its sign it loves, or its house it loves to be in, the 4th house, and right there on the angle. And you put Jupiter at the top of the chart, as we'll see in another example, and there's so much fortune and possibility there. But we have to put it back into the context of the chart. Jupiter is in this beautiful kite and these grand trines, really significant here. And something else to mention is that Jupiter is actually in a trine to Mercury at 16 to 20 degrees. Mercury is the ruler of the midheaven and the ruler of the chart. So, and this doesn't change in Mississippi. It's only 2-degree difference if we go back to the birth chart. So we see that we have the ruler of the angles. If you notice this, every angle, traditionally Jupiter rules Pisces, right? Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Mercury rules Virgo and Gemini. We have this grand trine formation and this sextile, this kite. We have it connecting with the rulers of every angle. This is what makes this place even more potentiated for Oprah. And this is going to be rare to find for someone, but this helps to explain why we have such success for Oprah in this location of the world. Rulers of the chart in this grand trine to each other. Wow, it's just magnificent. So thanks for checking out Oprah's chart here. Let's get back to the keynote, and we'll come into our next slide. So let's pull up. We've kind of talked about this, the midheaven, signs on the midheaven, planets on the midheaven, aspects to the midheaven. So a couple things here. I'm just going to list out some big astrocartography considerations that if we are pulling up these charts for our clients, or if we're starting to look at this, we really need to make sure to go through these and not leave them out if we're going to do a really thorough astrocartography investigation. This is just one of the techniques. We'll look at parans and local space and the others in a bit. So one of the things that we always want to talk about is what does our client want? If we're really looking at wanting a certain amount of dynamic energy, activity, fame, fortune, we got to get closer to an angle, put a planet closer to an angle, the midheaven or the ascendant, for instance, because that's going to create more dynamic energy. But if we want to chill out, if we want to retire, if we don't want to be right in the heart or the thick of that busyness and excitement, we don't want to be as close to the angle. The closer we live to the angle, the more strong that planet that is on the angle is going to dictate our life there. And so even if we want that planet, we have to, again, go back to the story of that planet as it is in our birth chart. We're going to get more of the aspects to that planet. We're also going to get, the traditional association. Is that planet in its rulership? Is it, dignified? Or is it in its detriment? These things will come up into the lived experience of someone in that location. So that's essential dignity. And we always want to think about that as we talk about the psychological textures in a place for someone in that location. Then we want to look at which side of the angle. Now, this is something important. What I mean by that is we could have and I'm going to show everyone this, so you just get a sense of what I mean. If we're looking at, just go back to Oprah's chart here, you see that Jupiter is on the midheaven, on the angle of career here. That it could still be on the angle of career if we're in the 9th house. So then we're saying that there's a difference here because we're going to bring in more of, we may bring in more teaching into our career path there. We may deal with foreigners more. We may work with the academic realms more, broadcasting, publishing. Even though we're emphasizing career, it's going to have a little bit of that 9th house flavor if the planet is actually in the 9th house as opposed to the 10th house. Same thing we can talk about with any of the angles. We're going to get the flavor of the house that it's in more. Now, this gets back to the intention. If I'm seeking, a really powerful relationship in a location and I'm looking at the angle of partnership, the 7th house, if I have the planet in the 6th house, maybe my relationship is going to be more affected by that planet and some of the 6th house associations. So the daily experience I may have with that partner, what we're doing every day, day in, day out, the 6th house significations are going to be also influenced by that planet. The 3rd house to the 4th house, we're dealing with, communication and networking and marketing and ideas that may influence us in our area of home, right? As opposed to here, for instance, if the moon is in the area of the 3rd house here, then we may see that the communication becomes even stronger theme than just being in the home, being in the nest, being in the secure location there. Now, if we look at relocation map, these kinds of things come up because the sun in this chart, and I'm using solar map software, which is part of SolarFire, but I'm using the full, SolarFire comes with a simple version of Solar Maps, but I'm using the full version of Solar Maps, which is, I love this program. It's been the only thing I've worked with for 7 years of relocation astrology. But the sun rising, let me show you how this works here. So depending on which side of the line you're on, you're going to get either the 12th house or the 1st house here. So this is a friend of mine, Melanie, and this is her chart in Asheville, North Carolina. And so you see that the sun is on the horizon here. And if we look at the actual maps, for the sun to be in the first house, it's left. It's left of this sun rising, solar ascendant line here. Now, if she was over, so there's Asheville to the left of that line. If she was over, say, in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the central part of North Carolina there, then she would actually get the 12th house flavor of the sun. The mysticism, the retreat, the meditation, all of those qualities, sanctuary, maybe working in an institution, some of those themes of the 12th house become more dominant than would be the first house. So there's some of those subtle differences if we're looking at the left versus right side of the line. We're looking at the different house cusps there. So this is actually important. I'll come back to Melanie's chart when showing about destiny lines, destiny points, and local space. But let's get back into the astrocartography. Okay, so so Saturn in India. I want to give you this example from my own chart. Now, I think this is really revealing, so you can see that we can't take a planet out of context. So coming to the maps, going into my chart, and we're going to pull up the map over in India. And I was in India back in 2004, 2005, and I want to just mention a little bit about this. If you see that I went through the northern route, some of the northern route of India, and this chart will be revealing on a lot of levels. But what you can see, if you're just looking at the map, is that here's Saturn on the midheaven, Saturn MC line. And then we have the sun on the descendant. And this is because I have Saturn squaring my sun within 1 degree in my birth chart. And so, okay, so then here's that square, but now that square is made angular. Now, this is where we have to look at, does somebody want to live with a Saturn square sun stronger in their life, more emphasized in their life because it's angular? Okay, so when we're looking at my experience here, and then you also see this Saturn line, which is the local space Saturn line, and I'll refer more to that when we get to the local space line. But in essence, local space lines act very similarly to astrocartography lines in the sense that the closer you live to a local space line, planetary line, you get more of the nature of that planet, and you get more of the nature of that planet as it is in your birth chart. Okay, so here we're seeing that there's quite a bit of Saturn going on, and the Saturn square to my sun, that primary angle I have between those two planets. If we're looking at some of the significations here, in my birth chart, Saturn is in Leo. And so what was happening here is in Dharamsala, right where this Saturn local space line is, Saturn on the midheaven, making Leo my midheaven here. In Dharamsala, I studied some of the traditional music of India, the ragas. I played a traditional instrument, which was the sarod, an old instrument. And I studied with some teachers from this area of the country. Well, studying the traditions is very Saturnian, right? Saturn in Leo, the traditional music, Leo. But one of the things that was happening to me for my 5 months in this part of the world was I was pretty much consistently ill in my stomach. You know, I wasn't digesting things properly. I was bloated, and this is really important because we have the Saturn square to the sun, and the sun has a lot to do with our life force and our vitality. And of course, Saturn can limit and constrain whatever he's touching. So of course, I have this in my birth chart, but in this location, it becomes really strong. I don't get sick a lot in my life, and I didn't before this or after, but here I was sick pretty consistently. Now, I wasn't, I wouldn't say my experience was horrible or anything like that, but what happened was this acute, like it wouldn't go away, and there was a real acute pain that I was experiencing. So I really got that Saturn square to the Sun strong. And also I was trying to really, create myself, some of my solar essence or my creative essence really strongly. That Leo midheaven, and then the Sun being angular, the Sun ruling Leo. So creativity to the people I was working with, the people I met while I was out there. And so then we also can look at, this is going to bring up this is a very important point, that we get some of the story from our birth chart, right? If a planet is angular, so here the Sun is angular, so we have to look at my Sun in my birth chart. And in my birth chart, the Sun is in the 12th house in my chart. So my Sun is in the 12th house, and this is typically the area, an area we don't associate with good health. We associate it with negative health or hospitalization, sometimes feeling like we're victimized or out of control, right? The ego doesn't have much to say. So I get that Sun 12th house kind of experience more. Well, I did. I was studying the spiritual traditions really strongly while I was out there. And that was the high side of the 12th house Sun that I have. But I also got sick. And if we go over to Varanasi right here, if you guys can see Varanasi there, I can even come in a little bit more. Varanasi, this is where I got sicker than I ever have in my life, on the Ganges River. And this is I was out for 3 days. It was feeling like I was really between worlds. I got a kind of bacteria there, and again, I was pretty much bloated. I got my gluten allergy. It really started when I was out in India, but I had no idea about gluten allergy, so I persisted in feeling that for months as I was out there, not really knowing what I was going through or what was really happening. So a little bit there about the planets on the angles and getting the story as it is in your birth chart, both by the house signification and also by the aspects in your chart. So now when we're also looking at some of these other astrocartography considerations, like I said, working with the different house systems, porphyry, equal houses, whole sign house systems, this becomes important to play with a few different house systems. If you get that a planet is on a cusp of a house in both porphyry and equal houses, then you can really kind of take it to the bank that that's going to be something someone's going to experience there. Okay, we mentioned planets on the house cusp. Again, stellium will show us, if we have 3 or 4 planets in a house, it's going to really shift the focus if we move, 2 or 3 time zones away.
Verdeluz?
So, yes.
I'm just wondering at the halftime here at 45
Yeah.
minutes into the talk, if you want, we're about an hour in, excuse me. Yeah, we're going to go till 5:15 as we agreed. You want to take a little 2 or 3 minute break, and I'll engage the audience with a little poll that Kim and I constructed, and that'll give you an opportunity to get a drink of water, and then we'll see in a couple minutes, okay?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Fantastic information, by the way. All right, everybody out there in poll land, let's just talk a little bit about some concepts that Verdeluz brought up. How do you currently live in the same geolocation in which you were born? So you have some choices there to respond. Yeah, sure do. No, I don't. And many of us may have moved and returned. So we're getting a good response. We'll just kind of 2 out of 3 have responded. We'll see if we can get everybody to vote here for this poll as Vertaluz makes his break. All right, Marlene, I don't know why you're not getting the poll, but that'll be a technical thing that we'll get to deal with later. Gotcha. That's interesting. I haven't had that feedback yet, but thank you for letting me know, Marlene. All right, I'm going to close the poll now, and we'll go ahead and share those results with everybody. And as most of you can see, most on 2 out of 3 on this call do not live in their place of their natal chart. In other words, yeah, they live elsewhere. So obviously, these lessons that we're learning today, relocation, astrology, geodetics, astrocartography, and local space, could become very important for you, as Vertaluz suggested. All right, so I'm going to wait for Vertaluz to come back. He's going to give me a clue when he does return, and then we'll.
Okay.
There he is. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're back.
all
I'm
right,
gonna.
great.
Hey,
All right, well,
before we start,
yeah.
there is another question from Roland in New Zealand. When drawing a relocation chart, Vertaluz, do you simply keep the birth date and time the same and change the location? Is that the process?
That's it. Yeah, if you're going to pull up a relocated chart, just pull it up for whatever location that person is moving or considering moving to.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, you can take over the audio controls. And did you see the poll results, Vertaluz, by the way?
I didn't, actually.
Can you see as a panelist right now on the screen?
No.
Okay. Basically, 2 out of 3 on this call have relocated from their natal chart. So that's kind of what we learned in the poll.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. It's pretty common now, and I'm one of them. So.
Yeah, I would say most of us for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it just really helps to emphasize why it's so important for just our own personal lives, and also if we're if we're teachers, if we're going to do a conference, something like this, if we are working as an astrologer, for instance, we can find those places where we're going to see potential for more clients coming in, or where a conference may be very successful, where we could hold a retreat. All of these kinds of things can be seen as we apply this tool. So I'm going to dive into all the planets and their meanings and the actual some of the actual examples. I know we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. I just wanted to see, do you know how much time I do have left so I can balance it? Are you guys there?
Yeah, you have 40 minutes, Vertaluz, 40 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Lou.
Sure.
Okay, so last couple points here. Sidereal zodiac. Okay, so this is a big thing. Moses, as a Vedic astrologer, also would look at the sidereal zodiac. This is something to consider, and he found a lot of truth with the sidereal zodiac. I don't usually pull it up myself because it would be too overwhelming. But if you want to work with it, it could probably reflect back to you a lot of medicine about these different locations as well. The other thing is that there is a technique. I think I pulled it up in another slide. We call directional strength, and directional strength is called Digbala in Vedic astrology. And it's basically that every planet has a position where it really feels like it can really do the work it wants to do. Let me pull up that slide real quick for everyone. Should be right there. There it is. So directional strength, real quick, there's like a correspondence here, and it makes a lot of sense. Mercury and Jupiter at the ascendant have directional strength. Teaching, communicating, networking. If you put those at the ascendant, really flows for people. Moon and Venus, of course, love to be in the roots, in the home, on the IC. So if you see them at the IC, they're even stronger there, right? Now, Saturn was on the descendant traditionally. Now you think, wow, Saturn on the descendant could bring some challenges in a relationship, but typically we want a relationship that we're going to be willing to work hard at and discipline ourselves and actually will endure and have the length. And this is something that traditionally Vedic astrologers would say Saturn has its strength there. And the Sun and Mars, this makes a lot of sense. Obviously, it's midday. If the Sun is on the midheaven, we can be really recognized there. Mars on the midheaven, we can really achieve our goals, go after what we want. So I actually work with this all the time. It's just something it filters into every reading, directional strength. And you could look at it the other way around. Where direction is, I guess you could say directional weakness, right? So I'll give you an example of directional weakness. And I'm going to pull up Mars as we start to talk here about the planets. And this is going to be from my own chart. Now, the signification of the planets, when we look at the astrocartography and when we look at local space lines, are the same. We know them if we've been practicing astrology. Of course, there's emphases that are slightly different if we're looking at the different angles, the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, the IC. And this is where this directional strength and weakness is kind of important. So here we know that Mars is going to bring the potentials of leadership and active energy, passion, sex, lots of energy into our life. But then we could see that Mars locations could bring in some defensiveness, anger, competition, and then movement. And Mars is restless. So what we see is on the West Coast in my own chart, I was actually born on the West Coast, and I have Mars on the IC. So throughout every, whether it's Oregon or Washington or California, Mars is on that longitude on the IC. And that would be Mars's directional weakness, because he'd rather be up at the top of the chart going out there and achieving whatever he wants to do. So what happened to me on the West Coast for my adulthood between 18 and 30 pretty much, is that I would move every few months. Until I moved out of the West Coast, and this was one of the reasons I did. And once I learned about this, it really brought a lot of compassion into my life towards myself and some of my experiences, because I had a lot of those Mars experiences in the home. One of them would be Mars on the IC. I'm moving all the time. One of them is I have a battle or a conflict or a confrontation in my home. And I had that a couple of times, where I didn't have easy energy with the people I lived with. And also Mars on the IC could be I want to live alone. And that's where I try to do that, here and there. But it did keep me moving all the time. And I consistently found that when I go to the West Coast, I feel really like charged up, yang. I'm trying to make stuff happen. Mars is angular. It's really strong there. And I can get burnt out and exhausted really easily. And that's one of the things that can happen on a Mars line. But I never felt settled there. And it wasn't until I moved to Colorado that I did. And we can talk more about that later. But that's an example of the directional weakness that can happen. And it's definitely real. And I want to inspire people to look at those considerations when playing with astrocartography. Last thing to mention, and this is really important, if you are working with this tool, if you pull up Pluto lines in the charts, in solar maps, if you pull up a chart, you're going to see that at times, I won't use this example just to save time, but that there's something called in mundo and zodiacal. And in solar maps, It's just that you're going to see that Pluto, because of its little bit different kind of orbit that it has, you will see that sometimes Pluto lines they will shift. They can shift a little bit, and it can cause a difference. So if I'm looking at, and I see Pluto where somebody's interested in moving, maybe Pluto's rising somewhere, I'm going to pull up these lines here in solar maps, in mundo, zodiacal. Zodiacal is what it would be in their horoscope. And then the in mundo is actually that sort of obtuse orbit that Pluto has. So this one will change. Other planets don't change too much. Some of the outers may, Neptune may a little bit, but I'm really looking strong at Pluto with this. So shifts between the zodiacal and the in mundo. This is also where you'll see, these are the controls. What lines am I going to see in solar maps? The local space lines, the planet directions here are always on for me, and I'll describe those in a minute. And then when we're looking at parans, which I'm going to talk about, I always put it onto all parans so I can see where these planetary crossings are. So this is just a little bit about the software and how you navigate it. So then let's go back here. We're going to look at, I think we all know the angles, planets on these angles, the ascendant affect our mask, our persona. They will dominate a lot there. There'll be a lot about our health and our body. The midheaven, of course, is the area of career, so the planets up there will be part of our calling, how we'll be recognized. But we're also going to have a burden with those planets. We're not going to get away from being held accountable, needing to do the responsibilities they're really associated with. Planets on the descendant, of course, will have to do with relationships and also business partners, all kinds of partnerships in our life. Opportunities often come in with planets on the descendant. Also, we'll project energies onto other people to feel those energies for us, right? So if we put one of the planets on the descendant, for instance, if we put the moon there, we may really want someone to really nurture us, a beloved to really nurture us. And of course, we could feel like a lot of codependency that may start to develop from something like that. So we have to be a little bit careful with projection with planets on the descendant. Planets on the IC, the areas of home, our internal state, our physical home, very, very important here if we're looking for what is going to affect the feeling I have where I live. Okay, so now we're jumping into these planets. And I just want to say before we do this, I want to mention that because I will use some examples, and that when we're looking at local space, these lines, because I'm going to talk about the planets, which have the same meaning, in local space, in parans, in astrocartography. These are planetary directions. So what I mean by that is you could think of these as vortices around the Earth. They're going to call you. These locations are going to call you. And what it means is, quick example, just so you see how it shows up, is that if I pull up, let's pull up this chart here for Jim Carrey, for instance, and we'll see that these lines are emanating out. But what these lines are, each of these is a planet or an asteroid. These are the local space lines, and they're actually planetary directions. So if you pointed from, the moment of birth, that place of birth, you'll see that Neptune was, out there over Seattle, and it keeps going around the circumference of the Earth. So what a lot of different relocation astrologers have talked about with these local space lines is that part of our soul gets attracted to that location. The moon part will get attracted there for domesticity and for home and for nurturance and community and family. That Neptune part of ourselves will follow that local space out for opening our imagination and our dream world, and maybe some of our spirituality and the arts. All of that will get opened along the local space Neptune line. So the significations are the same, and also we'll get the essence of that planet as it is in our birth chart. So you kind of, with local space, it's pretty front and center. You get what it is, you know, the meaning of the planet, the meaning as it is in your chart. And I'll just jump to this real quick, and then we'll go through the planets one by one. This local space, it's an existential situation you're going to feel. You're going to feel it. You're going to live it. It's going to be obvious. Here's a great example. George W. Bush. In his chart, he's a great local space example. Here he is. You know, the birth is out in Connecticut. So then you follow the lines out to Texas, and you figure, you know, you've got to have some powerful stuff going on in Texas. And really, you follow those local space lines. You come right out to that sun local space line, right through Texas. And he's perceived, he's loved, he's famous, he's recognized, he's popular in Texas. He becomes the governor of Texas, you know. The sun local space line goes right through there, but also he's governing there. He's governing very close to Austin. He's in Austin, Texas. He's governing close to his Saturn local space line. Okay, well, Saturn, you know, hard work, the discipline, you know, our professional life, our career. There he is right on top of that Austin with his Saturn local space line. You know, success over time, but also the sun is rising over Texas. Now, this is one of these locations that I wanted to mention that some of us will have, you know, in different places that we should pay attention to, and sometimes I'll point these out to my clients. It's sort of a destiny place. This is the sun rising over here, southern Oklahoma, northern Texas, the sun local space line. So it's a double sun signification here. And that's going to emanate out, you know, out through into Dallas, you know, out up through Wichita, like all this area coming out of, you know, within hundreds of miles of this crossing of an astrocartography line and a local space line. These are important locations, and you'll get the significance of those planets coming together really strong, and there'll be something to really pay attention to. So, okay, the last big here is if we go up into Iraq. This is George Bush's chart in Iraq, and if you notice right away, go right into Iraq, boom, Mars, local space line, goes directly, you know, pretty much over Baghdad. And here's where, you know, the war and all of this aggressive energy, and he's really hated there, and all of that kind of thing, and violence. And now notice this, Pluto on the midheaven. Pluto, Lord of Death and Rebirth, violence, intensity, death, you know. And here it is right over, in essence, you know, the Middle East sort of represents sort of one of those destiny points, but here's a destiny of Mars and Pluto coming together. It's probably not a destiny most of us want to be remembered for, but definitely George W. Bush is going to be remembered for that, you know, in that location. So great, you know, he's just a epitome of these examples of local space and relocation, astrocartography coming together. So, okay, so we're done with that. Now the sun, obviously we can achieve fame and recognition as we just talked about. We can also be overconfident. See George Bush again, right? Grandiose and dramatic, you know, back in Texas. Now I mentioned my friend Melanie, and I showed her chart for instance. And if we go back to her chart, she also has that destiny line going on here, very close. It's there in Charlotte, and she's going to feel that out in Asheville. Now that's a double sun signification, and this is where Melanie stepped into her life path. She studied with her teacher out here in shamanic breath work, and she she goes back there frequently to train, but she really found her calling and you know, with the sun, our life purpose out here in the Asheville and North Carolina area. So again, destiny location, sun location. Her sun is in Aquarius. She found her community out there, her tribe. And so this is obviously going to be one of those places that's going to be a big game changer in her life. John Lennon is a famous example. You know, he was born, out in, of course, where did he go? Oh, maybe I don't have this right here. Anyway, he has the sun on the descendant out in England where he was born. And of course, this is where the Beatles rise to fame, and he meets everyone that he partners up with to form the Beatles. Sun on the descendant, life force, vital energy, fame, popularity through the group, the people he's connected with. This is, you know, the Beatles and John Lennon. Where did it go? There it is. Okay, now we got it. Sun within 3 degrees of the descendant out in Liverpool where he was born, and where, you know, the group rises to fame. So that's the potential. Sun lines can bring a lot of fame, whether it's through our own self or through our, you know, partnering up with other people. Very significant, you know, if we're moving into business collaborations, Sun descendants could really bring that in really strongly. So moving back into the planet, you know, the significations, of course, the moon lines, nurture and sensitivity, belonging. Comforts really become important to us in the moon locations. And what can happen, we have to be somewhat weary with the moon lines, because even though they can bring those comforts, they can also create a lot of that emotional energy that we have to put outside of us. So we can be really needing to nurture people, sometimes building some dependencies with people. It's that familial energy. We can be more reactive in the moon location. Moon on the ascendant, for instance, we're very empathic to what's happening around us. You know, if we're going to work in the fields of caregiving or nurturing, or even if we want to be a mother, you know, moon on the midheaven could really be the location for us. But we will probably work as a caregiver in a public sphere out with the moon on the midheaven. Moon locations, moon on the IC, ideal locations to call home. We feel like we can nest, like we have a community, a family we can build there. So now Mercury lines bring in, you know, communication and speaking. We tend to be busy on Mercury lines. Great lines for writers. And Stephen King, you know, he was born in an area and he lived in an area where Mercury was actually on the roots of his chart. And you don't think of the roots of the chart being about career, but if you go and you check out Stephen King's chart, he does have this Mercury on the IC, and it's with Neptune on the IC. And here he is writing fantasy, horror, you know, these incredibly imaginative narratives. And he does it from his home, right? Mercury on the IC. So that works, you know. So sometimes even planets on the angle of home will reflect to us about our career path, especially if we're working out of our home. Okay. So another Mercury, famous Mercury person is Ted Turner. And Ted Turner, he, you know, CNN, he's a media mogul, PBS. All of that happened for him in Atlanta, and Mercury was rising there for him. It's a very dynamic location for him. And he's a great person to talk about when we want to mention the importance of dynamic areas. You know, you look here at his chart and you'll see that the local space lines, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, are all right there. Mercury is rising, even though it doesn't look too close. Because it's Mercury, it's actually within 1 degree of Atlanta rising. So here you go, the potential for massive amounts of communication technologies coming through him. And his Mercury, if you actually go into his chart, right, we see that Mercury is sextiling Mars and trining Saturn, and then squaring Neptune. So he's got to work in the media in some way. Mercury squared Neptune, trining Saturn, potential for great success over time, sextiling Mars, tons of energy behind it. He's going to be probably a leader, very competitive at what he's doing. This is what's happening out in Atlanta. This is putting all of the pieces of the charts and the local space lines and all of it together. Okay, so coming back, sorry I have to move the screen around so much, but let's move into Venus. Okay, so Venus, you know, obviously the goddess of love. She can bring in more women into our life in general. Partnerships, creating a lot more social bonding with people, relaxation, pleasure. You know, Venus lines, one of the traditional benefics, people tend to like it. But when we're talking about money, Venus can definitely bring in more money right away. You know, we tend to just have more fun. Of course, we can be lazy and indulgent with Venus lines. And, you know, spend more. That's something we have to think about. Yeah, we can earn more, but we can also spend more. If she's on the midheaven, we may work with women or work in the goddess tradition, have more women clients. So this is something to consider if we do have a lot of women clients. I'll just give the example in my own life about Venus lines that I think will be quite revealing for people. So if we go back into my chart, we go over to Spain. So southern Spain for me has always been a location that is really attractive, just very, very sensually attractive. The arts from Spain, the people from Spain I find incredibly gorgeous and sexy. I'm probably not the only one with that, but it's just got this, let me take off these lines, this energy that's just always really attracted me. And especially the architecture of southern Spain and the Moorish tradition, really just something that's always felt very attractive to me. Well, if you could see this, this is my Venus local space line going right through Andalusia, southern Spain. Cordoba is here, Granada is here, Sevilla is here. And I've been to these places. I'm just in love with the sort of the spirit. I like the flamenco music. There's the arts Venus. Now, I'll tell you, back in 2010, I went to a festival out in the middle part of Portugal, and I actually taught there. My Venus is in Gemini, and so Venus lines could bring in some teaching. I taught at a festival, a 20,000 person festival here called the Boom Festival. I had a great time. I was well liked. I was really appreciated by people. Met some great friends. Made money doing some readings at the festival, and I met a significant other that was a beautiful connection. Person I found very physically attractive, but she also was from Portugal, and so she had this beautiful accent. And my Venus is in Gemini, so we would be speaking in Spanish and Portuguese, and then a little bit of English, and it was this beautiful Gemini experience, you know. And of course, she had Venus in Gemini as well, so it was like this very strong expression of Venus, Venus as it is in my chart, Venus in Gemini, really, really profound experience. And lastly, since Gemini is the writer, what was happening to me in this location, and also when I went down into Morocco, and if you see Neptune is here as well in Morocco, I was just writing like crazy on the buses. I wrote like 6 or 7 short stories and lots of poetry. I wrote really epic sort of desert poetry when I was out in the Sahara on a camel, and that's my Neptune line. So Neptune, poetry, imagination, the dreams, you know. But also what happened in Morocco was that Neptune can bring in deception. an illusion. And out in Fez, in Morocco, sort of close to Neptune line here, but definitely picking up on it, I bought one of the rugs out there, Venus, purchase of something beautiful. But me and the woman I was with, who was a beloved out there, again, Venus, we both bought these rugs together, and we later found out that we were totally taken advantage of and that the rugs were not nearly worth what we were told they were worth. So there's that Neptune deception energy going on that I really felt, and it really strongly affected me. And by the time I was ready to leave, Morocco, especially in Marrakesh, one of the cultural capitals, my moon ascendant line was just disgusted because I couldn't create any boundary for myself, as I was just a tourist and I was just a piece of money. And I really just got really sick of being perceived that way. But I was really like a sponge to everything going on. And that's that moon ascendant type of energy. On one level, I love that. I love the architecture and the desert and the feeling, some of the Arabic culture. But then also I couldn't really get away from that sense of being the tourist and what that could mean in terms of trying to be taken advantage of.
Powerful anecdotes, Verdaluz. I just wanted to interrupt you briefly because I know we're going to want to capture the most salient points of that you have remaining. So you just notification, you got about 12 minutes, okay?
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so
even if you get the appropriate charts that you want to convey up on the screen, so we make sure we get them captured on the video for everybody.
For sure. Okay.
Great.
So I wanted to let's see. Let me mention, because I want to make sure we cover these other techniques briefly, and then whatever time we have left, we'll talk about a couple more planets. Parans. Parans are very important. Parans are these latitude lines. You'll see these yellow lines when I pull it back up. This is how the ancient Egyptians practiced astrology, where one fixed star was culminating and another fixed star was, let's say, rising. So they actually were angular to each other. They have these angular planets somewhere around the globe. So for instance, it's creating a square somewhere. So if you have Jupiter and Mercury Paran, you're going to have, like, Jupiter, let's say, rising, and Mercury at the top of your chart somewhere around the planet, and that's forming a square. Squares bring action and events into our lives. And so these Parans actually are very important alchemies of two planets coming together. And so you'll see, like on these charts, if I have the Parans put up, you'll see that these are latitude-based lines, and it just means that somewhere over the planet, these angles are forming. And because the Earth rotates, in 24 hours, or orbits in 24 hours, it doesn't matter where that angle is occurring between those two planets, because you're going to receive it over that latitude because of the rotation of the Earth. So the principle is the same. The closer you live to these angles or move there, these Parans, you're going to get more of the experience of those two planets as they are coming together. Sun, Moon, Ceres, Chiron, Pluto, Chiron, Venus, Pluto. It doesn't matter. The closer you get, the more you're going to get that experience. So we won't give any examples right now, just because we're running out of a bit of time with that. But it's just a very important tool that I bring into every relocation reading. We talked about local space. I want to mention geodetics. This is not a technique that I do a lot with clients, because I find so much information in the other techniques that we've been talking about. But geodetics, if you study this more, the Earth has these locations based off of, so basically every location around the Earth has a midheaven and an ascendant. And this is according to this geodetic map that's based off of the Greenwich Meridian. So this is something where the Aries midheaven begins over, parts of Europe, who went out and Aries the world. They went out and conquered the world, right? And if you go towards the east, right, you're basically creating a map of the Earth with the signs, and each location is going to have a rising sign and a midheaven. This is really interesting because you can actually find how you fit into the nature, the culture, sort of the natural energy of a location. I found that Steve Jobs had this Mercury energy really strong out, where he was born, but in the Bay Area, he had Mercury in his geodetic chart angular. And of course, it's Steve Jobs, so he's doing technology, Mercury-related things. There's a lot of examples, and this is a line of study that I think is really valid and important to look at. I know that Scott Wolfram does a lot, another evolutionary astrologer with this. You can find a location that's resonant to your geodetic. And what that means is you can find a location that has the same ascendant and same midheaven as you, and you can find like a spirit of resonance for you with that place. This happened to Yogananda, it happened to Krishnamurti, and had nothing to do with where they were from, in the eastern part of the world. So you have, it could be somewhere totally different, that you may have never gone to. Something to check out, and sometimes I will pull it up, but it's a little bit more rare. We have just a couple last minutes, so people from specific locations will carry the energy of a location. So if you have Jupiter rising somewhere, a lot of times the people from there will hold that Jupiter energy and give you some kind of opportunity, that Jupiter likes to give us, the Jupiter energy. The other thing is, so that's something to consider. You don't even have to go somewhere. You can actually connect with the people from there. Now, for evolutionary astrologers, we really want to always consider the nodes. And I have worked a lot with the nodal lines. They're very significant destiny locations for us. I always talk to my clients about nodal lines because our karma is being completed and resolved. Our dharma is coming into its fruition there, unfolding there. And also, if you see the north node at the top of the chart, you know that this could be something really important for this person's soul growth through their career path. And actually, you can use this in cyclocartography, which is the forecasting over a particular area. What I found when I looked at Sandra Bullock's chart is that when she won the Oscar in 2010, she actually had transiting North Node on her midheaven. As it was coming in January and February, the Oscars were in March, transiting North Node was right over Hollywood. She got the Oscar at that time. Pretty fascinating. The cyclocartography piece is just a huge, huge thing. Look at Barack Obama's chart, November 4th, 2008. You have progressed moon. The progressed chart is very interesting for relocation work. Progressed moon on the midheaven, right over Washington, D.C., and again the North Node on the midheaven at that time. He also was called the One. There was a real Messiah type of energy, a chosen one type of energy. Look at Neptune over the midheaven for the East Coast, Boston, all of New York, Chiron on the midheaven. It was really the story that we all saw unfolding during the elections of 2008. So I'm really, really strongly passionate about relocation astrology using cyclocartography or transits over a particular area at a particular time. This will reveal something really important for people, and it's kind of incomplete if we don't do a relocation reading for someone with that. Last thing I'll mention to everyone before I close it down is in my chart in Mexico, this last year I met my beloved on the end of the Mayan calendar, December 21st, 2012. And here we have, we met in Chichen Itza. And here we have an expression of some very important energy. Venus is rising in this location for me. So women and the goddess is going to be very strong energy, femininity very strong. But then you have this Paran of Venus and the nodes. The connection of love that really changes the course of my life, that is part of my soul's destiny, really unfolded up in this location. And of course, this Pluto line, this is a place that has changed my whole soul's journey. It's the Mayan calendar that actually got me into studying astrology and has transformed my soul, probably more than anything. And interestingly, if you look at that geodetic map here, I have the North Node on the descendant here, and it's everything about that culture. Again, remember the geodetic is about connecting with the culture. Everything about that culture and the study of it that has helped my soul grow. North Node on the descendant. The people I've connected with, a Mayan astrologer, helped me get set on my path there. This is the beauty once you start to integrate all of these techniques together. You really start to see this beautiful story unfolding for each of your clients' work or in your own soul's evolution. And I really feel that the piece of the puzzle when we're looking at how can my soul most evolve in this life and step into its higher octave of its life purpose, it comes not only through studying our birth charts, but studying these energy vortexes we call our planetary lines, our lines of enterprise, empowerment, and soul evolution through relocation astrology. So if any of you on this call or who are watching this webinar would like to go deeper, I'd love to talk to you more and check out, your charts and all your lines and geodetics and relocation, everything. So just my website is here, soulalchemyastrology.com. There's my email and my phone number. And there's actually quite a large essay I wrote about relocation astrology you can read on my website as well. And I'm actually doing a lot of teleclasses right now, and all of those are listed on my site, as well as a big evolutionary astrology and shamanic breathwork weekend retreat here in Colorado in a couple of weeks in October if you want to go deeper into this work. So I really want to thank everyone for joining us. There's a lot of information today and through this whole conference, and especially Leroy and Kim for having me on this really special conference at this really unique astrological time.
Aho, thank you, Verdeluz. Great information, a lot of it, and I'm sure I speak for everybody how much we appreciated all that. I mean, if you're like us, we even had our charts out, Kim Marie and I checking our local space lines and ACG lines. And that brings up one point of clarification I just wanted to get your feedback on. Roland out in New Zealand wants you asked to clarify the difference between those two, the difference between a local space line and an ACG line.
The local space lines are emerging or emanating out from your birthplace as directions. They're literally the direction where the planet was. When you were born, if you pointed in that direction, you would see that Saturn was in a certain directional area. Jupiter was in another one. Neptune in another one. So with planets on the angles, basically wherever you move around the planet, you're going to have different planets that are rising or setting or culminating. So that's what astrocartography is. It's really relocating your chart to different areas. Local space is not doing that. It's actually looking at what's emanating out from where you were born and the directions of those parts of your soul, those characters, those planets, and where they're trying to realize themselves around the earth. And one thing about that I'll mention too is these Pluto lines. This is something I want to mention for evolutionary astrologers. This is a line of research that I'm doing quite a bit of, and I've seen Pluto lines, Pluto local space lines, Pluto IC lines. These are very significant locations for people's soul evolution, transformation, and the potential of even these past life resonances. It's something I'm looking into with the nodes, with Pluto. So I'm always looking to see where can we find those locations where we feel like, oh yeah, I've been here before. I know this. And I really feel like the node lines have a lot to do with that, as well as the Pluto lines. And even the rulers of the nodes can help us with our soul's trajectory as well. I just didn't have time to get into all of that today, but there's a lot to talk about with just that angle of it.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's a great clarification. One last thing I wanted to point out, and Kim kind of scratched our head about, just to confirm or clarify, when doing a relocation chart, the only item that you change is simply the geolocation of where you're currently at. In other words, if you
Yeah,
were born at 1:13 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time in Rapid City, South Dakota, you keep that same time on the relocated chart.
yeah. So you keep it all the same. You in Jim Carrey's chart, all I did was move the location to LA. You're not gonna in most programs it'll adjust the time. So of course if he's born on the East Coast at 2:30 a.m., then he's gonna be 11:30 p.m. in LA.
Uh-huh.
But usually if like in Solar Fire, yeah, you definitely have to compensate for that. But Solar Fire does it automatically because you pull up a locality chart,
So
right?
it
So you
does change to the time of the relocated chart.
Okay, yes, it does exactly.
Okay.
I didn't say yes because I'm always using the locality function on here. But
Right
that's
on.
yeah, that is definitely true. Locality in Solar Fire, and then as soon as you put in the new location, it automatically adjusts it. But if you don't have that and you are doing it on Astro.com or somewhere else, you will have to adjust the time.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So thanks.
Yeah,
That's a great clarification to end
yeah.
on. And we
Thanks for
want
that
to,
question. Yeah.
again, thank you so much for your time. And as most of you can see on a screen, this is a graphic we turned into a giant poster around our house that turned into a big picture on our wall in Kim's consultation room. So we're very grateful for that gift many years ago for Luz. Thank you.
Oh, awesome.
And
Thank you guys for listening.
blessings to you and your beloved on your journey together as you now kind of merge and move forward. So again, thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much, and we'll see you soon.
All right, everyone take care. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I hope to connect with you more soon. Ciao. Namaste.